Welcome everyone. In this video I'm going to go through all 5 challenges from my for loops video, starting with outputting the 5 times table. So actually not the 5 times table, so we're going to ask the user for the times table and we're going to output that times table up to a multiple of 10 using a for loop. So let's ask the user for write a number to multiply. And we're going to put that number in an integer, and we're going to call it user, let's call it user num. So with that user num, we're going to start ourselves with the for loop. And it's predicted that we want to end at the user num. We don't want to end at user num. We're going to end at 10. So we're going to start at 0, end at 9. So that's going to loop 10 times. And in fact, there's no point in multiplying a number with 0, so I'm going to multiply it with 1, and we're going to use a less than or equals to end at 10. So if you just do the less than, if you do less than, it's going to end at 1 lower than the number that I'm highlighting now. If you use less than or equals, it's going to end at that specific number. So we are going to say, let's create an integer for the answer. Equals I multiplied by the user number. To be honest, it's not good practice to create the variable inside the for loop because that's an extra process that it would need to do. So we're going to create the integer outside of the for loop, starting at 0. So we're going to output that answer like that. And we're going to do a nice console.read key. So let's test it out. Let's do the 2 times table. As you can see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 16, 18, 20. Let's test it with the 5 times table. And there we go. So the way this is working is that it's taking the value of I and multiplying that with the user input, and then we're outputting that user input. So first time it's going to go 1 times the user input, second time through the loop it's going to go 2 times the user input, and so on. If you don't quite understand how it works, then go back and watch the full-on tutorial, which I would have linked in the description with the list. Playlist, it's called a playlist, isn't it? Next challenge. Sum of even numbers. Write a program that will calculate the sum of all the even numbers between 1 and 100 using a for loop. So what that means is that it's going to add up 2 and then 3 and then 4 and then 5 and then 6, the sum of all even numbers. This can be a little bit tricky. So what we're going to start off with is just outputting all of the even numbers in a for loop. So we're going to start at 0. And we're going to end at 100. And instead of saying I++, we're going to say I plus equals 2. So instead of going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's going to go 0, 2, 4, 6. So if I just output that I value, then you should see. Actually, we're going to remove this line of code here. In fact, I'm not going to remove it. I'll show you something. If I highlight all of these and I press this button here, it comments out the line. So if you don't want to use a line but you want to save it for later, just put 2 forward slashes in front of that line. If you highlight a bit of code and you press that button there, which is the comment all the selected lines, it will come out a load of lines at once, and then if you want to bring that back, you can press the button next to it, which is the uncomment selected lines, and that will bring it back there. So I want to get rid of that and just output. There we go, that's all the even numbers. Now how do we add them all together? A little bit trickier, but what we can do is create a total variable. Let's start this total at 0. So what can we do with this total variable? Inside the total variable, we can say the total is equal to itself plus whatever number of the loop we're on. So it's going to start at 0, then it's going to add 2, then it's going to add 4, then it's going to add 6, and so on until it's added up all of them. And I didn't put an output, so what I'm going to do is just do a console.writeLine for the total, and when I run that, all of the even numbers up to 100 adds up to 2550. So that is challenge 2 complete. Challenge 3. How do you choose a start and the end of the loop? So at the end of the for loop video, I showed that what you can do is, instead of having these as set numbers, you can actually change these as to variables. So I think the code looked something like start equals 0 and the end equals 100. So something similar to that. What I did was, instead of starting at 0, I started it at this start variable. Instead of ending at 100, I ended it at this end variable. So the code pretty much does exactly the same thing. However, these are now variables, which means if I was to do a read key into these, not int.parse, we're going to do a read line, not read key. A console.readLine I need to write. You may be wondering why I don't edit out my mistakes. The reason is I want you to show you that not every programmer just gets everything right first time. People make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. And I want to see you, well, I want you to see me make mistakes and how I spot them and fix them. And I do make a lot of mistakes when I'm programming, especially when I'm trying to comment over it. It's actually quite difficult to comment over it and program at the same time. So we've got the start and the end. What else does the challenge ask us to do? It asks us to output all of the numbers. So a simple console.writeLine outputting the I values. Let's give the user a, in fact, we've already got a console there. We'll copy that. Write a number to start. Write a number to end. Let's make sure this works. So if we start at 5 and end at 20, it should output 5 to 20. You always want to double check it's output the exact numbers, just in case you have accidentally put the wrong less than. So if I, for example, move it to an less than instead of a less than and equal to, if I did 5 and 20, you can see it stops at 19 instead of 20. So that's why it's always a good idea to test your code. Next challenge is write a program that uses the following pattern using nested for loops. So I'm going to show you how I would solve this in stages. First stage is, how do I output just a single set of asterisks? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to start my loop going from 0 to 5. So let's get rid of all of this. We don't need any of this. And instead of writing I, we're going to write the asterisk out instead. So if I start at 0 and we end at, end at 5, this should output 5 asterisks. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's exactly how many we need. Now, it then asks you, not that one, it asks you to output 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. This can be a little tricky. However, the clue is in the challenge itself. You need to use nested for loops. So what do we mean by nesting? Nesting is when you put another either selection or iteration inside an existing selection or iteration. So if I was to say 4, let's do int j this time. Now I cannot use int I. I have to use a different variable identifier because I is already being used inside this for loop. J equals 0. J less than. Now what do we put this number? So let's start it at 5 to begin with. So I++. And these are the exact steps I took to actually solve this myself. So I started with the 5 for the 5 rows. So how do I do 5 columns? So I started with that, so 0 to 5. So not quite right. Something else needs to be added here. If you do a right instead of a right line, it won't add a new line with the whenever it outputs. So that's not right either. So I'm ending in the wrong place. J less than 5. And the reason is I put I++ there. So what you just saw was called an infinite loop. So it was not increasing the value of j here. It was increasing the value of I. So just a small mistake I made there. So there we go. Now we've got a line of this. Not quite what I'm after. So what I could do is, after the inner for loop, I could do another for loop, which adds another line right here. If I put nothing in there, all it will do is it will just add a new line. So first time through the for loop, it's going to add the 5 stars. Like that. So it's going to do 5 stars, then 5 stars, and it's going to add a new line every time. In the future, I'm going to make a video on 2-dimensional arrays, and it will show you a step-by-step on how it actually loops through each of these nested loops, because 2D arrays need nested loops to go through each row and column of a 2-dimensional array. So there's going to be a nice graphic to show you this step-by-step guide of how this works. But just note, if I do it like this, it will write a square of asterisks. So still not what I want. What I could do now is have a look at the problem. So first row, I need it to go 1. So I need it to go at least once first time through. Second needs to do 2 loops. Third needs to do 3, 4, and then 5. Well, the problem I've got is that each time it's always ending at 5. So as I've already showed you, you can change this to a variable. So let's create a variable. So int end, and instead of saying 5, we can say end. So each time through the loop, let's start this as 1. And what I'm going to do is, just to make this a little bit easier on myself, I'm going to start at 1 and actually end at 5, because I kind of don't want to start. Yeah, so we're going to end at 5. There we go. So starting at 1, ended at 5. So if I do this now, it's going to go 1. Every time I finish one of these rows, if I increase that end by 1, so let's say plus equals 1, second time through this loop, it's going to be 2, then 3, then 4. So that is how I can start with one loop and then go 2, 3, 4, 5, using a variable to end instead of just writing 5 as the constant. There is a slightly different way you can do this with less lines of code actually, and this is a slightly cleverer way of doing this. So you can use this I value, so you can say this I is going to start at 1, then it's going to be 2, then it's going to be 3. So if I actually say end at the I value, we've saved a few lines of code and it's done exactly the same thing. So there you go, that is challenge 4. One more challenge. Can you do the Fibonacci sequence? So the Fibonacci sequence, if you do not know, is start at 0, then 1, and then the next number is the sum of the previous 2 numbers. So 0 plus 1 is 1. Next number is the sum of the previous 2 numbers, so 1 plus 1 is 2. Then 1 plus 2 is 3. Not 4. 3. Then 2 plus 3 is 5. 3 plus 5 is 8, and so on. So it's going to add the numbers together. So we're going to need 3 variables to do this. We're going to say int, let's say previous number. Int next number is already figuring out that I want a previous and a next, and a current number. So we want 3 numbers, 1 to store the previous number, 1 to store the current number, and then 1 to store the next number. Let's get rid of all of this. We're going to start at 1 and end at 10. Why not? So we're going to do the first 10 of the Fibonacci. it's what we're going to have to do as well is we're going to have to give us the first two numbers. So 0 and then 1. So what do we do? How does it know what the next is? So it knows what the next number is by adding the previous with the current number. So that is going to do the next. I've just realized I've done that slightly wrong. There you go. I'm going to give the next an initial value, although it doesn't really matter because it's going to be given a value right here. It's just what I do. I like to give my variables an initial value. So if we output the next, I want to write line next. You can see just adds 1, so not quite. So what we do is we move everything up 1. So we can say the previous is now equal to the current, and then the current is now equal to the next. And if I've done this correctly, it should show the Fibonacci sequence. 2 to 3 is 5, 3 plus 5 is 8. Perfect. Now it's not showing the first two numbers. We can't get we can't get around that in the for loop, but we can kind of cheat and just output the first two numbers. We can output previous and then we can output the current, just so we've got the first two numbers and then it's the proper Fibonacci sequence. There we go. So that is the proper Fibonacci sequence. And there we go. I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below in the comments section. And if you enjoyed this video, please give this a like and subscribe. I will see you guys next time.